to Remove Before Race, my friends. I'm your host, Raz. Now, when I think of the 45S series of AMG, specifically the A45, I think of my good friend Thor in his youth, a super powerful entity who craves the glory of battle and rivalries with its Audi counterpart in what is undoubtedly a sports car in the compact segment. Then I look at the GLA 45S, yet another powerful car, but this one, like the older Thor, more sensible, a bit more stoic, a better daily and a better all-round car. And then when we look at the new GLA 45S, he looks like Fat Thor from Infinity War and Endgame. He just looks fat. Same power, but clearly he's been playing way too much Fortnite with Korg and Meek.
Over here, pile of rocks waving at you.
It's not really a good look, is it? But we do not judge a car on its cover on RBR, so let's see how this car performs. Will it be an overweight has-been, or can it surprise us with sporting ability? Here is the GLA 45S. So guys, if you want a performance SUV at AMG, you've essentially got way too much choice. So I'm going to try and remember each model that you can get as an SUV at AMG, and I'm probably going to forget some, but let's see if I can get them all. First, we've got the GLS 63, newly launched with a V8 hybrid system. Then we've got the GLE 53, GLE 63S. We've got coupe versions of both of those cars. We've also got the Big Daddy G63 itself, with no doubt more variants to come. Then we've got the GLC 43 and the GLC 63 and 63S, also in SUV forms for those cars as well. And we've got the GLB 35, today's GLA 45S. Am I missing one? Ah yes, our next review, the GLA 35. So, there's a lot of SUVs at AMG, and it seems like AMG actually build more performance SUVs than they do sports cars. That shouldn't really surprise you because it's a similar story at Porsche, and it's all down to the buyers. Shame on you guys for not buying more exciting sports cars and sports sedans. So even without looking at rivals, even within AMG, it's a really tough place for the GLA 45S to justify its existence. On the used market, you've got absolutely epic cars like the GLC 63S, which are going to be close to this on price, and then you've got the brilliant GLE 53, which is not far away either, so it really has to justify its existence. But first we have to see how much has changed versus the old one. So the old GLA 45, very similar to the A45 that it shared its underpinnings with. We still had 380 brake horsepower coming from that 4-cylinder single turbo engine. 0 to 60 was slightly slower than A-Class, as you would expect, at 4.8 seconds, and it had a simplified, or the most simple 4MATIC system that you could get, which gave about 50% power going to the rear. But still a really fun car, really exciting sound coming out of that exhaust system as well, though oddly, it was less practical than the A-Class we all felt, particularly with regards to rear room, headroom, boot space. So a bit strange, but to my eyes, it was really good looking because it looked more like a chunky, more angular hatchback than it did a small SUV, and I think that really went well for it with the aerodynamic package. Now, when you compare that to our car today, just on the face of it, you can see that a lot has changed just in the dimensions of the new car versus the old one. It's a whole 10 centimeters higher, but it's 1.5 centimeters shorter. It's also quite a bit wider. So the intended effect of this is, of course, giving way more room inside versus that old car, which really, this car really needed to differentiate itself just from the A-Class. So that's actually a positive. But the unintended effect is, it looks like a small blob of a small SUV rather than a slightly larger, fast hatchback. But I'll get onto design later. Let's talk about the 45S itself. Now, this brings in all the internals of our lovely young Thor, which of course is a great positive. First of all, we've got that epic engine, which is the world's most powerful production 4-cylinder currently, giving us 421 brake horsepower out of this S model, increased torque, and a damn quick 0 to 60 of 4.3 seconds out of this GLA. The next most important part, we've got 4MATIC Plus, which is the much more advanced version of the four-wheel drive system, much like we find in the GLE 53, 63, and of course in the A45S. This gives us up to 100% power to the rear, though it hasn't got drift mode. I know, you're gonna cry yourself to sleep. You really wanted to drift a GLA 45S, didn't you? No, I kid, you never needed that. The other benefit of the GLA 45S is that versus the 35, it's got a more open exhaust system with less mufflers, which means we've actually got decent pops and bangs and emotions coming out of this exhaust versus its 35 sibling. Next, we've got suspension improvements and rigidity improvements. So we've got use of shear panels, we've got more struts and braces both in the front and the rear, which as we saw in the A45S is going to give this a much more sporting ability. Though the GLA shares much of the suspension hardware like the A-arms and the rigidity bits, etc. with the A45S, the calibration on it has been done to provide more comfort versus the A45, which is great because that car can be a little bit jarring, whereas this is going to promote more comfort. Looks-wise, sadly, it does not follow in the footsteps of the great-looking A45S and the great-looking CLA 45S, where those two cars had completely different front ends to their 35 counterparts. Sadly, in the GLA 45S, you've essentially got the exact same body as the 35, bar some more open intakes down below. As you can see, we've got the new AMG grille on the front as well. We've got much prettier headlights, which kind of mimic the CLA and the A-Class. You've got power domes on the front as the previous car had as well. And the rear is a lot more GLE and GLC looking, particularly thanks to the two-part lights. Indeed, if you look at the rear, again, it's the same story. All you've got is the quad pipes and the diffuser is the same. The only way to save yourself from this is to get the aerodynamic package, and only then does it start to relive some of its former glory in terms of its looks. The aerodynamic package gives you the big wing off the A45S. You also get some aero flicks on the rear, an extra part of aero on the lower diffuser, and a couple of aero flicks on the front as well. You don't even get the nice multi-spokes that you get in the new A and the CLA. Instead, you get either 35 or old GLE hand-me-downs. So really, for me, the whole looks have been quite a letdown versus what I thought was a really cool-looking previous car. One other general complaint I have of the GLA and the GLB, in fact, is the amount of black plastic cladding that is used on the lower half of the car. Now, Mercedes and AMG will both tell you that it's to denote this off-roading character, but then tell me this, why does the most off-roading Mercedes and AMG, the G63, have no black plastic cladding at all, and instead everything is body colored? Same with the next most off-roading capable Mercedes, which is the GLS, and the next one, which is the GLE. You see a trend here, don't you? So let's just be honest, it's not a matter of off-roading ability, it's more a matter of price. Now believe me, I never ever thought I'd say this, but perhaps the one worth waiting for is the GLB 45, which is rumored to come. Now hear me out on this. We've got a slightly more exciting design. Again, I never thought I'd say that, but you've got more G-Wagon type squarish looks, a bigger grille. You'll have the quad pipes on the rear this time. And you've got the option of 7 seats to match with the added dynamism that will be pulled over from A45S. So to my mind, surely this is going to be just that much more unique. We'll have to see. Now, this GLA 45S has got its work cut out to convince me of whether it has any prowess at all. And the best way to do that is smash it round some country roads. But I'm not going to do that here. In a twist, we're going to head back to Affalterbach and you're going to meet my German counterpart, Herr AMG, who's going to take over for me. I am indeed Herr Rehan, because I have more hair. We have many dad jokes at RBR. So I'm going to do things the other way around today and start with the emotion start. So we're going to turn the car on, see what it sounds like when you hold the pedal. So you get a really nice pop and bang out of the 45s. That applies to GLA 45S as well. You simply won't get that same startup in the 35, it just won't exist. So that's a first differentiator immediately in terms of getting some emotion daily out of your AMG. In the UK market, there will be a big difference in the interior of the GLA 45S versus the 35. In the 45S, you will essentially get this interior. So we get the AMG control switches as standard, you get the performance seats, you get the option, hopefully, of the black with yellow and magma grey Nappa leather, which looks fantastic. I think it's the best option that you can get in both A45 and GLA. But in the GLA 35, you won't get, for example, the steering bits. You won't get these seats. So it'll be a little more sparse compared to the top dog, which is this car. Now, of course, we've been over this interior with the A45 many times. You've got the AMG specific steering wheel with the dials. You've got individual mode that you can configure to your liking. You've got the digital screen, again, with different designs, but the main one for AMG is the Super Sport display that you see in front of you with 3 different configurable areas. Of course, you've got MBUX with track pace, and you can record track times, drag races. You can see Hockenheim in there, and you get the usual AMG dials and readouts, etc. MBUX we've gone over many, many times in other videos, and it's up to date and it's great inside the GLA. Now, what is slightly strange to me, having been used to the A45S, is how different your seating position is. You're sitting that much higher. It's that much more like GLB. In this one, it's just like the GLB where you're sitting high, but the dashboard is so huge. Even on my lowest setting here, I can see the heads-up display. I see so much of the dashboard. I can't see any of the bonnet. And I'll have to raise even higher, which I wouldn't like, because then I'm sitting way too high for a car that's meant to be sporty. So, having driven it, I'm not convinced that the seating position and this whole dashboard top area is that great for something that's meant to be more sporty. It definitely conveys this idea of SUV, but for the sporty side of it, it's all a bit like you won't be able to get to an area that you're comfortable in, say in an A45S. But the benefit of the GLA is, of course, rear space. So much more headroom. I think you've got a lot more legroom by the looks of it as well. You've got boot space, you've got a bigger boot aperture as well. So all of that practicality element definitely comes into this in terms of your decision to buy this over at A45. But really today I'm more interested in how does this thing perform on the open road versus that, and particularly for you guys in the USA, does this come close enough to A45S? Should you be considering an old GLC 63 instead? Should you be looking at a different brand? I'm going to explore all of this right now on the road. So guys, the last 45S I drove was the A45S flat out at our private filming studio, and that car absolutely blew me away with just how fast it is in real life. So I want to see if I've got some of that flavour here. Plus, buying a fast SUV at AMG now is tough because AMG, like all car manufacturers know, SUV make really good sales. So they have built a lot of SUVs. I think more than 50% of my AMG reviews in the last year or so have been AMG SUVs. So it's quite the minefield for the customer, you know, which car do you choose out of this plethora of GLA 35s, GLB 35s, GLC 43, GLC 63, GLE 53. There's so many options, and the price points are somewhat similar, the practicality is somewhat similar. So this GLA 45S kind of sits in the middle of all of that, being quite close in performance and price and whatnot to many of its internal rivals. Now, compared to its previous iteration, it is a very different car. That formula of the previous GLA 45 has been taken up by the GLA 35, and you will see that is the next video that we have on GLA. This car, however, is all new. It's got 4MATIC Plus, like in the A45S. Yes, no drift mode, because why? I mean, do I miss drift mode in this right now? No, why would you? So it should show much of the same driving dynamics and speed and excitement that that car has. And already I can see that. I just drove the GLA 35 and I was not smiling like I am in this car. The brake response is that much better. The engine is a fantastic engine, isn't it? It makes anything it's been attached to rocket into the distance. And you know what? It sounds pretty good until you let off throttle and you get this type sound happening. But at least you get some half decent pops and bangs coming out of this exhaust, which again you will not get in the 35 AMG. So a bit more AMG drama and emotion in the 45S. Talking speed initially, this feels really, really fast. Especially for such a large car, it's much more intimidating driving fast than the A45S. But even though the hardware is similar on suspension, it rides and handles so much better than the 35 does. It's such a big upgrade. Steering is that much keener. We know we've got more rigidity on the front end thanks to the changes on the 45S. and it really shows. I've actually got confidence driving fast where I was feeling really quite nervous in the 35. As with the 45S, the gearbox is really great, and it works great in tandem with this fantastic engine that revs higher than the previous 45S one. But yes, speed and power not lacking. If anything, it feels like it's got too much power for a car its size, but I'm sure it's something that you will get used to as you get into a groove of driving it. I'm really happy about this because I was sad about the US market not getting the A45, but the dynamics and the feel of this car, you have to manage expectations, but they're not that far off. Actually, that's not true. They are far off because this is a larger, taller car. What I mean by that is the experience you get of driving this car fast is very reminiscent of that car. Yes, you've got more weight to deal with. Yes, you've got a larger car in terms of its general size. Yes, you've got more body roll. Yes, you've got a bit more understeer. But generally speaking, it's really well sorted. It's really rapid, and it does start to shrink into a hatchback, like other brilliant cars of this ilk, like the Macan Turbo. Now, in terms of sound, it's got a good soundtrack, particularly versus the 35 versions of the GLA and the GLB, whereas those got that horrible muffler in the middle of the car that kills all the pops and bangs. You still get the odd occasional one here, you get a louder bang on upshift as well, and generally just a better sounding car. Don't know if you guys can hear that, but I'm getting some decent pops and bangs out of this. I drove the CLA 35 on these same roads, and that car being more dynamic than the GLA kind of shrunk around me, but this car is doing the same. I can't say that for the GLA 35 I drove. The handling is just much better, the engine is so sweet, the car is so fast. Yes, I'm driving it to a certain level. I think if I exceeded a level that I was comfortable with, this car simply would not handle as well as the A45 or the CLA 45S. That is absolutely undoubted. I also don't think it's quite as hatchback-like as the Macan Turbo either. I'd love to drive this back-to-back with GLC 63 or 43 and see how it fares. I think it'd do pretty good. We have got race mode as well, remember, that you don't get in your 35. I'm so glad I drove this back-to-back because you really then appreciate how much difference the 4MATIC Plus makes to the standard 4MATIC, because you get that much more power going to the rear, and you really do feel it. You can see it on our display over here as well. Definitely a much more different feeling in power delivery and handling thanks to that 4MATIC Plus. Race mode is actually quite different to Sports Plus in this car. I don't think I've felt such an exaggerated difference before. It's definitely got a lot more AMG emotion, got some better sound coming out of the exhaust that I've not noticed before as well. God, this car does really brake and turn so well. So yeah, this is quite the viable alternative, definitely to a GLC 43. I think it would run absolute circles around that car. Being a full fat AMG, I would expect that as well. I like to drive it back to GLC 63, but I'm a huge fan of that car, and it's so dynamically well sorted. It sounds so bloody good. I don't think that this would really stand a chance. So, like a second-hand, a used one of the previous gen is a really good alternative to flunking out 60-65 grand on one of these. Now, I can't tell much about the comfort of this car because we're in Germany and the roads are really good. So I'm going to again wait for that in the UK. It doesn't seem too dissimilar, but I did feel an immediate difference compared to the 35, that I could feel even more of the texture of the road. So clearly those suspension changes that they made in the 45S, making this, you know, that much more keen on its turn-in, having it that much more rigid, it's definitely translating within the first 100 yards of driving this car. So I expect it to be more crashy on normal driving. Can't really say that right now because it's handling the road perfectly well, but I always like to reserve that judgment for UK roads, so stay tuned for that. It has surprised me, this car. I thought it wouldn't really excite me. It doesn't excite me in its looks, I've made that very clear. But in terms of a mini SUV variant of the A45S, this has really done a good job of that. And I've actually had fun, and I think you guys can tell that as well. This is one of those cars that you look at it and you think, that can't drive nicely. And then you get pleasantly surprised when it does, and that's a rare occasion. Usually it's the opposite, so really happy to find that in the GLA 45. So a great little SUV, more emotion than you'd get out of something like the Macan Turbo. really not convinced on the looks, but with aero package I suspect it would be a lot better. Yes, it's not really got the sound of the old car, but dynamically it's pretty much on another level. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this full review of the GLA 45S. If you did, please do like, subscribe and hit the bell icon. And I'm going to drop this back to Affalterbach. See you next time.